Welcome back to the Sleepy Stoic Sanctuary, where ancient wisdom cuts through the illusions that keep modern men trapped in endless cycles of activity without achievement. Tonight, we learn from Lucius Annaeus Seneca, not just one of Rome's greatest philosophers, but its most successful businessman, advisor to emperors, and the man who understood the greatest paradox facing accomplished men. Why those who achieve the most often feel like they have the least time, and why constant activity can become the enemy of meaningful progress. Seneca was the richest man in the Roman Empire, advisor to Emperor Nero, successful playwright, and influential politician. Yet his greatest insights came not from external achievements, but from his understanding of time, how we lose it, how we waste it, and how we can reclaim it through philosophical wisdom. This is not merely the story of ancient time management. This is the blueprint for escaping the modern trap of being busy without being effective, of moving constantly without moving forward, of achieving success while losing the very life that success was meant to enhance. Every successful man faces this paradox. The more you achieve, the more demands are placed on your time. The more valuable you become to others, the less time you seem to have for yourself. The more productive you get, the more you're expected to produce. Success becomes a prison of endless obligations and urgent demands. Seneca faced all of this 2,000 years ago, and he discovered something profound. The problem is not that we have too little time, but that we fail to understand what time actually is and how to use it according to philosophical principles rather than external pressures. Tonight, you will learn why busy men never find peace, how to distinguish between motion and progress, and how to reclaim sovereignty over your most precious resource. Not your money, not your energy, but your time itself. As you settle into your bed, prepare to revolutionize your relationship with time, to stop being its victim and start being its master, to find abundance where you once felt scarcity, to discover peace in the midst of productivity. Be calm. Be clear. Be dangerous. Tonight, we learn to master time with the wisdom of the philosopher, who proved that wealth and wisdom can coexist when guided by Stoic principles. Take 3 deep breaths with me now. In through your nose, hold for a moment, and release slowly through your mouth. Feel your body beginning to settle into the comfort of your bed. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Release any tension you've been carrying from the day. Your jaw relaxes, your forehead smooths, and your eyes grow heavy with the approach of peaceful sleep. Starting from the crown of your head, imagine a warm, golden light beginning to flow down through your body. This is the light of temporal wisdom, the same light that guided Seneca through his understanding of time's true nature. Feel it flowing down your forehead, relaxing every muscle in your face. The golden light moves down your neck and shoulders, releasing all tension. Your arms grow heavy and relaxed, sinking deeper into the mattress. Your chest rises and falls in a natural, peaceful rhythm. Each breath brings you deeper into the tranquility of minds that understand time's true value. Feel the warm light flowing down through your torso, relaxing your back, your abdomen, releasing any stress or worry you may have been holding about time, deadlines, or productivity. You are safe here in this moment. You are protected by the wisdom of proper time understanding. The light continues down through your hips and thighs, warming every muscle, encouraging complete relaxation. Your legs grow heavy, sinking into the bed as if they're resting after a day of purposeful rather than frantic activity. Down through your calves and feet, the golden light completes its journey, leaving you completely relaxed, completely at peace, completely ready to receive the ancient wisdom of time mastery and philosophical productivity. Your mind grows quiet and receptive, like Seneca in his villa garden, watching water flow in fountains while contemplating the flow of time itself. You are ready for whatever wisdom this ancient teaching about time's true nature will bring to your dreams. You are grounded in this moment, yet open to the profound insights about temporal sovereignty that await. You are safe. You are calm. You are ready to learn from the letters of the philosopher who mastered both wealth and time, knowing that his understanding will become your understanding. Breathe deeply and let the most practical wisdom about time ever written begin. Lucius Annaeus Seneca lived what most would consider the perfect life. Born into wealth, he became the richest man in the Roman Empire, accumulating a fortune equivalent to billions in modern currency. He advised Emperor Nero, wrote plays that packed Roman theaters, and wielded political influence that shaped the ancient world. Yet Seneca's greatest legacy was not his wealth or power, but his understanding of why these external achievements, rather than bringing peace, often brought greater anxiety, more demands on time, and deeper questions about what constituted a life well lived. "It is not that we have a short time to live," he wrote to his friend Lucilius, "but that we waste a lot of it." This insight came not from theoretical philosophy, but from lived experience. Seneca had achieved everything that society told him would bring happiness, yet found himself asking why success felt so much like a sophisticated form of slavery. Seneca was no ascetic philosopher rejecting worldly concerns. He was a practical man dealing with practical challenges, managing vast business interests, navigating political intrigue, balancing family responsibilities with public duties, trying to find meaning and purpose in the midst of constant demands on his attention and energy. But he discovered something that escapes most successful men, that the relationship between external achievement and internal satisfaction is not what we imagine it to be. That having more money doesn't automatically mean having more time. That achieving higher positions often means accepting greater servitude to others' expectations. His letters to Lucilius read like correspondence from a modern executive to a trusted friend, full of insights about stress management, work-life balance, finding purpose amid productivity, and maintaining character while climbing hierarchies of success. Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end, he observed, understanding that each achievement creates new obligations, each success generates new expectations, each level of wealth or status requires new forms of maintenance and protection. Seneca faced what every accomplished man faces: the realization that external success, rather than solving the fundamental questions of human existence, often makes them more urgent and complex. The poor man worries about survival. The rich man worries about meaning. The powerless man dreams of influence. The powerful man struggles with the burden of responsibility. But rather than concluding that success was meaningless, Seneca developed a philosophy that could transform success from a burden into a tool for virtue, from a source of anxiety into a foundation for wisdom, from an end in itself into a means for living according to philosophical principles. This was not the philosophy of retreat or resignation, but the philosophy of engagement. How to remain fully active in the world while maintaining perspective about what truly matters. How to pursue achievement while avoiding attachment. How to build wealth while building character. In his most famous work, On the Shortness of Life, Seneca addressed the complaint that everyone makes but few understand, that life is too short to accomplish everything we want to do. His response reveals one of the most profound insights about time ever recorded. Life is long enough if you know how to use it, he argued. The problem is not that we have insufficient time, but that we squander the time we have on activities that serve others. Priorities rather than our own values that create busyness without purpose, that fill hours without enriching life. Seneca identified the 3 ways that people lose time, and remarkably, these patterns are even more relevant today than they were 2,000 years ago. We lose time to the past through regret and nostalgia. We lose time to the future through anxiety and endless planning. And we lose time in the present by failing to live consciously and intentionally. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality, he observed, noting how much mental energy we waste on problems that never materialize, worst-case scenarios that never occur, and anxieties about futures that exist only in our minds. But his deepest insight was about how successful people often become slaves to their own achievements. Nothing will ever be yours, he wrote, if you cannot call your hours your own. The wealthy man who cannot take a walk without checking messages has less freedom than the poor man who controls his own schedule. Seneca had experienced this personally. As advisor to Nero, he was constantly on call for imperial business. As one of Rome's richest men, he had endless business interests requiring attention. As a prominent senator, He had political obligations that consumed his days, yet he learned to find pockets of true time, moments when he belonged completely to himself. People are frugal in guarding their personal property, he noted, but as soon as it comes to squandering time, they are most wasteful of the one thing in which it is right to be stingy. We will argue over a few coins in a business deal, but give away hours of our lives to anyone who asks for them. This led to his revolutionary insight about time ownership. Most people, even successful people, do not actually own their time. It is owned by their employers, their clients, their social obligations, their habits, their addictions to distraction. They are rich in money, but poor in time, wealthy in possessions, but impoverished in presence. Seneca discovered that reclaiming time requires the same strategic thinking and disciplined effort that we apply to building wealth or advancing careers. It requires saying no to good opportunities in order to say yes to great ones. It requires protecting time for reflection, relationship, and personal growth with the same intensity we protect our financial investments. True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence upon the future, he wrote, capturing the essence of temporal wisdom. Not because the future doesn't matter, but because the only way to create a good future is through conscious, intentional action in the present moment. The man who masters time, according to Seneca, is not the man who can do more things faster, but the man who can distinguish between what deserves his time and what doesn't, between motion and progress, between busyness and purpose. Seneca identified what he called the busy man's disease, the modern epidemic of constant activity that creates the illusion of productivity while actually preventing the deep work that leads to meaningful achievement. This disease was as common in ancient Rome as it is in modern boardrooms. Nothing, to my way of thinking, is a better proof of a well-ordered mind than a man's ability to stop just where he is and pass some time in his own company, he wrote, recognizing that the inability to be still, to reflect, to think deeply was a sign of mental disorder rather than productivity. Seneca observed the wealthy Romans of his day rushing from meeting to meeting, constantly reading correspondence, always available to clients and supplicants, never taking time for genuine reflection or strategic thinking. Sound familiar? He noticed that these men, despite their constant activity, rarely achieved anything of lasting value. They confused motion with progress, busyness with effectiveness, urgent tasks with important work. They were always moving, but rarely advancing toward any meaningful goal. They lose the day in expectation of the night, and the night in fear of the dawn. He wrote about men who never found satisfaction in the present moment because they were always focused on the next task, the next opportunity, the next problem to solve. But Seneca's insight went deeper than time management. He understood that busyness often serves as an escape from the harder work of examining our lives, clarifying our values, and making conscious choices about what deserves our attention. Activity becomes a drug that prevents the anxiety that comes from asking fundamental questions about purpose and meaning. The busy man is never wise, and the wise man is never busy, he concluded, drawing a distinction that seems paradoxical until you understand what he meant by wisdom. The wise man focuses his energy on activities that align with his values and advance his purposes. The busy man scatters his energy across activities chosen by habit, social pressure, or other people's priorities. Seneca practiced what he preached, even while managing vast business interests and political responsibilities. He established regular times for reading and reflection that were protected from interruption. He took daily walks for thinking and meditation. He maintained regular correspondence with friends about philosophical topics rather than just business matters. Most importantly, he regularly examined his activities to distinguish between what he was doing because it was important and what he was doing merely because it was expected, habitual, or immediately urgent. It is likely that some troubles will befall us, he wrote, but it is not a present fact. How often has the unexpected happened? How often has the expected never come to pass? Much of our busyness comes from trying to prevent problems that will never occur, or preparing for futures that will never materialize. Seneca's cure for the busy man's disease was simple but difficult. Learn to distinguish between what deserves your time and what doesn't. Protect time for deep work as carefully as you protect your financial investments. And remember that the goal of activity should be to create space for the reflection and relationships that make life meaningful, not to eliminate them. The man who can stop, who can think, who can choose his activities based on philosophical principles rather than external pressures, has achieved a form of wealth that no amount of money can buy. He has purchased time itself. Seneca's letters to his friend Lucilius read like a modern executive's journal, full of practical insights about managing time, energy, and attention in a demanding world. These weren't abstract philosophical treatises, but real advice from one accomplished man to another about how to live well while maintaining worldly responsibilities. "I am always in haste," he admits in one letter, "and this haste brings no good to my health or my peace of mind." Here was one of the most successful men in Rome acknowledging the very problem that plagues modern high achievers. The feeling that there's never enough time, that everything is urgent, that slowing down means falling behind. But Seneca's solution was not to work harder or move faster. Instead, he developed what he called the discipline of time, a systematic approach to reclaiming temporal sovereignty that any man can apply regardless of his external circumstances. Every day, every hour ought to be stripped of all that is superfluous, he advised Lucilius. This wasn't about becoming more efficient at doing everything, but about becoming more intentional about what deserved to be done at all. The goal was not to save time, but to invest it. Seneca practiced daily and weekly reviews of how he spent his time, asking questions that cut through the illusions of productivity. What did I accomplish today that moved me toward my most important goals? What did I do simply because I always do it? What activities served my values versus what activities served others' expectations of me? He also developed what modern psychologists would call temporal boundaries, protected time for the activities that he considered essential to a life well lived. Reading philosophy was not something he did when he had time. It was scheduled like a business meeting. Reflection and planning were not luxuries for when work was finished. They were work itself. "Nothing will ever be yours," he reminded his friend, "if you cannot call your hours your own." This was not just about time management, but about life ownership, the difference between living your own life and living a life that others have designed for you. One of his most practical insights concerned what he called temporal anxiety, the constant worry that there isn't enough time to accomplish everything we want to do. Seneca's response was both philosophical and practical. Clarify what you actually want to accomplish versus what you think you should want to accomplish. Most of what we say and do is not necessary, he observed. If you can eliminate it, you'll have more time and more tranquility as a bonus. This wasn't about becoming lazy, but about becoming selective, choosing to do fewer things with greater attention and intention. Seneca also understood the connection between time mastery and character development. No person was ever honored for what he received, he wrote. Honor has been the reward for what he gave. Time becomes valuable not when we hoard it, but when we invest it in activities that develop our character and serve purposes larger than immediate pleasure or profit. His letters reveal a man who had learned to find satisfaction in the process of living according to philosophical principles, rather than only in achieving external outcomes. This allowed him to invest time in relationships, reflection, and personal growth without feeling guilty about unproductive time. Life is long enough if you know how to use it was not just a philosophical platitude for Seneca, but a practical reality he had achieved through disciplined attention to how he spent his days, his hours, and ultimately his life. Seneca practiced what the Stoics called memento mori, regular contemplation of death, not as a morbid obsession, but as the ultimate clarifier of time's value and life's priorities. Let us think of death, he wrote, and we shall find life more precious. This practice was intensely practical for Seneca. As advisor to Nero, he lived with the constant possibility of political execution. As a wealthy man in turbulent times, he knew that fortunes could disappear overnight. As a human being, he understood that health and life itself were temporary gifts rather than permanent possessions. You could die today. Let this determine your actions and thoughts. Was not meant to create anxiety, but to cut through the trivial concerns that consume most people's mental energy. When you truly understand that your time is limited, you become much more selective about how you spend it. Seneca noticed that people who avoided thinking about death often made decisions as if they had unlimited time, pursuing goals that didn't really matter to them, maintaining relationships that drained their energy, engaging in activities that served social expectations rather than personal values. But those who regularly contemplated mortality made different choices. They prioritized relationships with people they loved. They focused on work that felt meaningful rather than just profitable. They said no to opportunities that would consume time without contributing to their most important purposes. "Nothing will ever be yours if you cannot call your time your own," became more than a philosophical principle when viewed through the lens of mortality. If you only have a limited number of hours in your life, then every hour given away carelessly is an hour lost forever. Seneca's practice included what he called life reviews, regular examination of how he was spending his days, as if he were looking back on them from the end of his life. "Will I be satisfied with how I use today when I'm on my deathbed?" was a question that eliminated much trivial activity and clarified meaningful priorities. This perspective also freed him from many of the anxieties that plague successful people. Concern about reputation, worry about losing wealth, fear of professional setbacks, all of these diminished when viewed from the perspective of mortality. In the end, we all return to dust. What matters is not what we accumulated, but who we became while accumulating it. Death consciousness also enhanced his appreciation for present experiences. True happiness is to enjoy the present, without anxious dependence upon the future, took on deeper meaning when he understood that the present moment might be his last opportunity to experience joy, love, beauty, or wisdom. For modern men, Seneca's memento mori practice offers similar benefits. Regular contemplation of life's finite nature eliminates much of the FOMO, fear of missing out, that drives endless activity. It provides perspective on setbacks that seem devastating, but are actually temporary. It clarifies what deserves worry and what doesn't. "What we fear never happens," Seneca observed, "and most of what does happen is not as bad as we feared." Death consciousness helps distinguish between real problems that deserve attention and imaginary problems that waste mental energy. The man who understands that his time is limited becomes more generous with love, more selective with commitments, more present in relationships, and more intentional about how he invests his irreplaceable hours. Seneca's final test of this philosophy came when Nero ordered him to commit suicide. His response demonstrated the ultimate fruit of lifelong memento mori practice. He met death with philosophical calm, using his final hours to comfort his friends and continue teaching about virtue. Death had been his teacher in life, and life had prepared him to meet death with dignity. Seneca understood that mastery of time began each morning with the practice of conscious intention setting. Before responding to letters, before attending to business, before engaging with others' demands on his attention, he spent time clarifying his own priorities and purposes for the day ahead. "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves," he wrote. And this challenge began each day with the choice of how to approach the coming hours. Would the day own him, or would he own the day? His morning practice included what he called philosophical preparation, reminding himself of Stoic principles that would guide his responses to whatever challenges arose. Time scarcity was often an illusion, created by poor planning and reactive habits, rather than actual lack of hours. "I cannot escape death, but at least I can escape the fear of it," applied equally to time anxiety. Seneca could not escape the reality of limited time. but he could escape the panic and poor decision-making that came from treating every demand as equally urgent. Each morning, he would ask himself 3 questions that any modern man can apply. What are the most important outcomes I want to achieve today? What activities should I avoid because they serve others' purposes rather than my own? How can I approach today's challenges in a way that builds rather than depletes my character? This practice helped him distinguish between what he called time spent and time invested. Time spent was simply the passage of hours in activity. Time invested was the conscious application of hours toward purposes that aligned with his values and contributed to his long-term flourishing. Seneca also practiced what modern productivity experts would call temporal boundaries, specific times protected for specific types of activities. Morning hours for reading and reflection were as inviolable as business meetings. Time for walking and thinking was scheduled like diplomatic appointments. Nothing will ever be yours if you cannot call your hours your own, meant creating actual ownership over specific hours, not just hoping for free time when all other obligations were fulfilled. The morning practice also included what he called anticipatory planning, thinking through the day's likely challenges and preparing philosophical responses rather than just tactical reactions. If someone criticized his policies, how would he respond with virtue rather than defensiveness? If unexpected, urgent demands arose, how would he evaluate them against his deeper purposes? This preparation prevented what he called reactive living, the pattern of spending entire days responding to others' priorities without advancing your own. Most people, he observed, live as guests in their own lives, always accommodating others' schedules and never claiming time for their own purposes. Let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life, he would remind himself each morning. This wasn't morbid thinking, but clarity practice, approaching each day as if it were valuable enough to deserve conscious intention rather than habitual reaction. The man who owns his morning, according to Seneca, has the best chance of owning his day. The man who owns his days has the best chance of owning his life. And the man who owns his life has achieved the only wealth that death cannot take away: the satisfaction of time well spent according to principles that matter. Modern men can apply Seneca's morning practice by starting each day with even 10 minutes of conscious intention setting, asking not just, "What do I need to do today?" but "Who do I want to be today?" and "How can I spend today's hours in a way that I'll respect when I review this day from the perspective of my deathbed?" Perhaps no skill was more crucial to Seneca's mastery of time than his ability to say no with grace, strength, and philosophical conviction. In a society where social obligations could consume every waking hour, he learned that protecting his time required the same strategic thinking and firm boundaries that protected his wealth. People are frugal in guarding their personal property, he observed, but as soon as it comes to squandering time, they are most wasteful of the one thing in which it is right to be stingy. Learning to be appropriately stingy with time meant learning to refuse requests that served others' convenience rather than his own purposes. This was not selfishness in Seneca's philosophy, but stewardship. Time was a finite resource entrusted to him for specific purposes: developing his character, serving his family, fulfilling his genuine responsibilities, and contributing to the common good. Wasting this resource on trivial social obligations or others' poor planning was actually a moral failing. Seneca developed what he called criteria for engagement, philosophical principles that helped him evaluate requests for his time. Did this opportunity align with his values? Would it contribute to his character development or his ability to serve others meaningfully? Was it something only he could do, or could it be handled equally well by someone else? He noticed that many people said yes to everything, not out of generosity, but out of fear. Fear of missing opportunities, fear of disappointing others, fear of appearing unimportant or uninvolved. But this fear-based decision-making led to lives that belonged to everyone except the person living them. Nothing will ever be yours if you cannot call your hours your own. Required the courage to disappoint people whose expectations were based on your availability rather than your actual responsibilities or purposes. Seneca practiced what he called graceful refusal, ways of saying no that honored both his own boundaries and others' dignity. I appreciate your thinking of me for this opportunity, but I've committed my time to projects that better serve my current purposes, was more effective than either harsh rejection or weak excuses. He also distinguished between obligations that arose from his genuine roles and responsibilities as father, senator, advisor, and obligations that arose from social pressure, habit, or others' assumptions about his availability. The first category deserved his attention. The second category deserved respectful but firm boundaries. Most importantly, Seneca understood that saying no to good opportunities was often necessary to say yes to great ones. Time and energy are finite resources. Investing them in activities that are merely interesting or socially expected means having less available for activities that are truly important. The busy man is never wise, and the wise man is never busy, applied directly to this principle. The wise man appeared less busy, not because he was lazy, but because he was selective. He had learned to distinguish between motion and progress, between activity and achievement. Seneca's approach to saying no included what he called proactive communication, letting people know in advance what kinds of requests would receive yes versus no responses, rather than making these decisions case by case. This reduced the number of inappropriate requests and made his boundaries clear before conflicts arose. He also practiced what modern psychologists call values-based decision-making, using his deepest principles rather than immediate emotions or social pressure to guide his choices about time allocation. This provided consistency and reduced the mental energy required for each decision. For modern men, Seneca's example demonstrates that saying no is not a negative skill, but a positive one. The ability to protect space for what matters most by refusing what matters less. It's the difference between living reactively according to others' priorities and living proactively according to your own values. The man who can say no gracefully and consistently has achieved a form of temporal sovereignty that no external success can provide. He owns his own life, rather than renting it out to whoever makes the loudest or most recent demands on his attention. Seneca showed that this skill, like any other, improves with practice and becomes easier as you clarify what you're saying yes to when you say no to everything else. Each evening, Seneca practiced what he called the daily accounting, a systematic review of how he had spent his time, energy, and attention during the day. This was not self-criticism, but self-awareness, the practice of conscious living that transformed time from something that happened to him into something he actively directed. When the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent, he wrote, I examine the whole day and go back over what I've done and said, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by. This evening practice was as important to his philosophy as his morning preparation, the bookends that created conscious intention around each day. The evening review included 3 types of examination that any modern man can practice. First, the practical review. What did I accomplish today that moved me toward my most important goals? What activities consume time without creating value? What patterns in my time use do I want to change tomorrow? Second, the character review. How did I respond to challenges and difficulties? Did I maintain virtue under pressure, or did I compromise my principles for convenience? What situations triggered poor responses, and how can I prepare better for similar situations in the future? Third, the philosophical review. Did I live according to my stated values today? Or did I let external pressures determine my choices? What did I learn about myself, about others, or about life that can guide future decisions? This practice prevented what Seneca called unconscious living, the pattern of moving through days without awareness, letting habits and reactions determine outcomes rather than making conscious choices about how to spend irreplaceable time. Nothing will ever be yours if you cannot call your hours your own, required not just claiming time, but being accountable for how that time was used. The evening review created this accountability, not to external authorities, but to his own stated purposes and values. Seneca noticed that people who didn't practice regular self-examination often repeated the same mistakes, fell into the same time-wasting patterns, and failed to learn from their experiences. Days blended into weeks, weeks into months, without conscious direction or meaningful progress. But those who practiced evening review developed what he called temporal wisdom, the ability to learn from time use rather than just experience it, to identify patterns that served their purposes versus patterns that served others' expectations or their own unconscious habits. The practice also created what modern psychologists would call closure, a sense of completion for each day that allowed for restful sleep rather than anxious rumination about unfinished business or poor decisions. I put my day up for review, Seneca wrote. I go back over what I've done and said, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by. For why should I fear any of my mistakes, when I can say, "Watch out that you don't do it again. But now I forgive you." This approach combined honest self-assessment with self-compassion, examining the stakes not for self-punishment, but for learning that would prevent repetition. The goal was growth, not guilt. For modern men, Seneca's evening review can be adapted to fit any schedule or lifestyle. Even 5 minutes of conscious reflection before sleep can transform the experience of time from unconscious consumption to conscious investment. The questions can be simple. What went well today? What could I improve tomorrow? How did I live according to my values, and where did I fall short? What did I learn that can guide future decisions? The man who reviews his days consciously begins to live them more consciously. The man who accounts for his time begins to invest it more wisely. And the man who learns from his experience of time becomes capable of mastering it rather than being mastered by it. Seneca's evening practice created a feedback loop between intention and experience, between planning and execution, between aspiration and reality, the foundation for continuous improvement in the art of living well. If Seneca lived today, he would immediately recognize the digital version of the busy man's disease, the constant ping of notifications, the endless scroll of social media, the illusion that staying connected to everything means staying connected to what matters. His principle, that nothing will ever be yours if you cannot call your hours your own, applies even more urgently in an age when our phones can summon us to respond to others. Priorities every minute of every day. Digital technology has made it possible to be busy 24 hours a day while accomplishing nothing of lasting significance. Seneca would see that modern men face the same choice he faced. Will you use your tools to serve your purposes, or will your tools use you to serve their purposes? Will technology enhance your ability to live according to philosophical principles, or will it distract you from even remembering what those principles are? His practice of morning intention setting becomes even more crucial when you wake up to hundreds of emails, dozens of notifications, and an endless stream of other people's urgencies competing for your immediate attention. The man who doesn't set his own priorities for the day will spend the day serving priorities set by algorithms designed to capture attention rather than create value. People are frugal in guarding their personal property, but wasteful with time. Applies directly to how we interact with digital devices. We'll use coupons to save a few dollars, but give away hours to social media platforms whose business model depends on monetizing our attention. Seneca's practice of saying no gracefully extends to saying no to digital demands, turning off notifications during focused work, setting specific times for checking email rather than responding reactively, using technology to serve your purposes rather than letting it train you to serve its purposes. His evening review practice becomes even more valuable when applied to digital habits. How much time did I spend on my phone today? What percentage of that time served my actual goals versus serving the platform's goal of keeping me engaged? What information did I consume? And how much of it actually improved my thinking or decision-making? Modern men can apply Seneca's temporal sovereignty by creating what he would call digital boundaries, protected time when devices are off, specific purposes for each type of digital engagement, and regular evaluation of whether technology is enhancing or undermining their ability to live consciously. His understanding that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality applies directly to information overconsumption. Most of the news, social media drama, and digital anxiety we experience comes from problems that don't actually affect our lives, but create stress as if they were immediate personal threats. Seneca would advocate for what modern researchers call information dieting, being as selective about what information you consume as you are about what food you eat, choosing sources that nourish wisdom rather than simply stimulate emotional reactions. His practice of memento mori, remembering that time is finite, becomes even more powerful when applied to digital habits. If you knew you only had a year to live, how much of it would you spend scrolling through social media? If your time was truly precious, would you give it away to platforms designed to be addictive? The man who applies Seneca's principles to digital life becomes capable of what ancient philosophers and modern researchers both recognize as essential for human flourishing: the ability to pay attention to what deserves attention, to be present with what matters, and to use technology as a tool rather than becoming its product. Seneca's letters to Lucilius, if written today, might include advice like check email at specific times rather than constantly. Use social media to maintain real relationships rather than to escape from them. Choose information sources that make you wiser rather than just more informed about things you cannot influence. The ancient wisdom of temporal sovereignty, owning your time rather than having it owned by others, has never been more relevant or more necessary than in an age when the forces competing for your attention have become more sophisticated, persistent, and profitable than anything Seneca could have imagined. Seneca's final lesson about time came in how he chose to die. When Nero ordered his suicide, Seneca used his last hours to continue teaching his friends about virtue, to comfort his wife, and to demonstrate that a life lived according to philosophical principles prepared you to meet death with dignity. Even in his final moments, he owned his time rather than being owned by circumstances. Death was the ultimate test of whether he had truly learned to live consciously. And his response showed that temporal mastery was not about controlling external events, but about maintaining inner sovereignty regardless of what events occurred. The letters he wrote to Lucilius about time, the practices he developed for owning his days, the wisdom he gained about distinguishing between motion and progress, all of this became his legacy, not because it was theoretical philosophy, but because it was practical wisdom tested under the pressures of real life. Seneca proved that time mastery is possible for anyone willing to practice the disciplines of conscious intention, regular reflection, and values-based decision-making. You don't need to be the richest man in Rome to own your hours. You don't need perfect circumstances to live according to temporal sovereignty. What you need is what Seneca demonstrated: the understanding that time is your most precious resource, the discipline to protect it as carefully as you protect your financial investments, and the wisdom to invest it in activities that build character and serve purposes larger than immediate pleasure or profit. His example shows that busyness is a choice, not a necessity, that peace is available even in the midst of productivity, that the man who masters time doesn't necessarily do more things, but does the right things with greater attention and intention. Modern men who apply Seneca's principles discover what he discovered, that time abundance is not about having more hours, but about using the hours you have more consciously. That temporal sovereignty creates a form of wealth that no external circumstances can touch. The busy man's disease that Seneca identified 2,000 years ago has not disappeared. It has intensified. But so has the relevance of his cure, learning to distinguish between what deserves your time and what doesn't, protecting space for reflection and relationship, and remembering that the goal of productivity is to create room for the activities that make life meaningful. Tonight, as you rest, remember that you carry within you the same potential for temporal mastery that guided Seneca through the challenges of wealth, power, and responsibility while maintaining peace and philosophical wisdom. Time will pass whether you own it or not. Hours will be spent whether you invest them consciously or squander them unconsciously. The choice that remains always available is the choice Seneca made every morning and reviewed every evening. Will today belong to you, or will you belong to everyone and everything except yourself? The man who chooses temporal sovereignty, who owns his time rather than being owned by others' urgencies, has achieved a form of freedom that no external success can provide and no external failure can remove. And so Seneca teaches us that time is not something that happens to us, but something we can learn to direct through conscious intention, philosophical discipline, and the wisdom to distinguish between what deserves our attention and what doesn't. Let this ancient wisdom of temporal mastery settle into your heart as you drift towards sleep. Let the principles of time sovereignty guide your dreams, reminding you that whatever demands tomorrow may bring, you have within you the same potential for conscious living that transformed a busy Roman businessman into a master of time itself. Rest now in the peace that comes from understanding time's true nature, knowing that busyness is a choice, that presence is always available, and that the man who owns his time owns his life. Sleep the sleep of time masters, and wake with the wisdom of Seneca.